Thank you. This means so much, but to have you guys, you stand for me, I should be standing for you. I know what you do. Years on the bench as a district judge in Texas have shown me what you do, and I have the utmost respect. Nobody deals, I think, in law enforcement with the type of problems that you do, and yet you still can come to something like this and look normal. I mean, that's pretty impressive. I think God has a way of preparing us for things that are in our future, even though we don't know what's out there. I didn't plan on being a congressman. But there was a huge backlog of cases, and I know we elect our judges in Texas, but a huge backlog. Some had gone back 20 years, most of them drug cases, and so it was clear that we needed a new judge, somebody that was going to move cases and knew how to file them. And so after I got elected, the first thing I had to do is get these cases where all these guys, when a defendant's out on bond, he doesn't care if his case never comes to trial. He's good with it being there 20 years. So the first thing I had to do was set every case for trial. If there was a defendant out on bond, then we had a number of big cattle calls, hundreds of defendants, their attorneys, and the first hearing had to be one thing: call their case, call them up to the bench with their attorney, say your trial date is on such and such a day at such and such a time. Have you got that? Court reporter taking everything down. They'd be on the record and saying in court they understood their time and date of trial, and that way if they didn't show up, we'd have an arrest warrant immediately issued. And it's amazing how much quicker people are ready for trial if they're sitting in jail instead of out on bond. So we were able to move cases pretty quickly. But that first cattle call, I was calling one case after another. Are you the defendant so-and-so? He'd say yes on the record. Say your trial date is such and you got it? Yes, sir. And so anyway, I called one after another. One comes up with his lawyer, and I said, are you the defendant so-and-so? And he looked at me before he could say anything. The lawyer said, Judge, my client is deaf. We're going to need an interpreter for the trial. And I said, that's fine. We'll have one for the trial. We'll have one for every pretrial hearing after this. But today, all I got to do is make sure he knows when his trial is. So I looked him in the eye and I said, can you read my lips? And he looked me in the eye and went, I see, I didn't know it at the time, but that was good preparation for Washington. People will look in the eye in this town and just lie to you. Not the case, Ron, when you come to our committee to testify. But anyway, people have asked me a number of times, do you miss being a judge? And I tell you, the thing that got me thinking about leaving the bench and running for Congress was seeing more and more women come before me for two things: felony, welfare fraud, and involved in drugs. And I kept getting the same story on so many cases over and over. They were bored with high school. Somebody said, sometimes a family member, every now and then a mother, will just drop out and have a baby. The government will send you a check. And they would, and then they'd find out, man, you can't really live on this money. So they have another and another and another, and they get further and further behind, and they think, gee, I got to do something. I'm just getting deeper into the rut. I can't get out. So they would either go get another job. This is the people, I know everybody doesn't do this, but people came before me with felonies. They'd either go get another job and not tell the feds, and then that's welfare fraud, or they would see people making money in drugs and think, well, maybe that would get me out of the rut. I know the Great Society legislation in '60 was born out of the best intent. Intent doesn't matter when you're destroying lives. They saw single women with kids having to deal with deadbeat dads, and they thought, let's help them. We'll give them a check. Well, when you pay somebody for an activity 45 years later, you get a lot of what you're willing to pay for, which is where we are today. We've gone from under 7% in the mid-60s of children born to single mothers to now well over 40, heading toward 50%. You get what you pay for. We've seen the destruction of the family. I've had people before me on for drug charges, and usually there's some assaultive behavior when they're in with a gang. And he said, I don't understand why the prosecutor, these people are all down on gangs. This is the only family I've ever had. We have a problem in America, and drug use is growing. It doesn't help when national leaders give it credibility by saying, yeah, I smoked dope, yeah, I did cocaine. They don't know the damage they've done. So when I'm asked, do you miss being a judge, it's only when I want somebody to sit down and shut up is when I really miss being a judge. And in Congress, everybody has a timed, I've said we need to change the rule from time deadlines to word deadlines. It's unfair to us from the South. The guys from New York, they can say 3 or 4 more times. But I did have one guy who, at his pretrial, kept yelling out obscenities, and it was clear, and I told my bailiff when he yelled some obscenities at the prosecutor, we needed him gagged, and I told my bailiff, gag him. And he went in and got one of my spare ties. And what I meant. So anyway, I told the sheriff, I said, check with the feds. There's got to be a recommended way to gag people. Because I know at his trial, he's going to be yelling out like this. And I know some judges would prefer when somebody's out of control to put them in a separate room and have them watch by video. Not this judge. I wanted to have them in the trial, watching and hearing everything went on. So I told the sheriff, I said, check with the feds, see what they recommend for gagging. He came back later and said, they say duct tape is the best. I said, I got a roll in my car, in my desk. So I went to my office and I got a roll of duct tape. I gave it to my bailiff and I said, when we go try, I want this out on your desk. So he sees it sitting there. And I told the sheriff's office, now, when I say gagging, I'm going to have to use some warnings. I'll warn him 3 times. And on the 3rd time, I don't want a 5-minute delay. When I say gagging, I want him gagged immediately. And apparently, I didn't know it. They practiced. Seriously. So the 3rd time when he was screaming obscenities, and I'd already warned him that he was going to be gagged if he didn't. So 1, and then a little further on 2, and then on the 3rd one I said, that's it. His name was Jones. Mr. Jones, you said all you're going to say for now, gagging. And immediately, 2 guys grabbed his arms, handcuffed his arms to the chair, his legs to the chair. I was thinking a little piece of tape. It was, I'm not sure, 6 or 7 times. And, after the state rested, I got to ask him if he wants to waive his rights to testify or remain silent. So we sent the jury out, and I said, and I went through, you have the right to remain silent, and everything you say could be used against you. Your attorney can give you advice, but it's your decision. I went through all that stuff, and then finally I said, all right, we're going to remove the tape so you can tell me whether or not you wish to testify. And that tape removal went, and he had a beard, too. And it went something like, this is what I could hear from my perspective. Anyway, so when the last strip came off, he said, I said, Mr. Jones, do you wish to waive your rights to testify or you wish to remain silent? And he screamed in a loud voice, you can call it. I said, thank you, Mr. Jones. We've heard all we're going to hear from you for the rest of the trial. Gag him again. And so here came the tape. And so anyway, fast forward 8 years later, the chief deputy calls and said, Judge, I know preliminary hearings, you're not afraid of anything, and you don't want the deputy up there by the defendant, but we got a guy that could come over the bench at you. We really want to have somebody on either side. So, well, you really think it's that serious? Fine, but you know, let him come over there. I'd have something waiting for him to let him go. But anyway, the deputy stood on either side, and he answered respectfully. He didn't say, Your Honor, but he said, yes, sir, and no, sir, and just really not a problem at all. So the hearing's over, and had another hearing after that. We finished. I called the chief deputy and had him come over, and I said, that guy wasn't any problem at all. Why did you think he was? I couldn't believe it either. And they had some people ready to grab him there in the courtroom. He said, I inquired and I found out. But he said this morning at 5:30 they went to dress him out. He was naked and had relieved himself and was trying to get it on any officer that came in. We had a couple officers hurt and had to send him to get stitches. We finally had to get the water hose and spray him into a corner where we could finally get him calmed down. And this is the guy we were dealing with and concerned about. I said, well, how do you account for the conversion? And he said, well, and we have our jail catty-cornered from the courthouse. They come through a tunnel. There's a chain, and they handcuff them to the chain and bring several in at the same time. So when they brought the chain this morning, Judge, my jailer, the transport officer told me that he heard one of the other defendants say to him, hey, I know you want to play crazy, but I've been in that judge's court you're going to. He had a guy that played crazy like you. He mummified the guy. He said, I'm not kidding. And then they tore it all off, ripped his hair and his beard out, and then they put it back on. He said, you know, it's up to you. You can play crazy, but I wouldn't in front of that judge. And somehow from there till he got to my courtroom, he decided not to play crazy. It's just amazing. One of the things that I did, because I felt like I understood. We have so many young people today. They've had teachers or parents say no, and then they made it yes. Teachers that were not allowed to discipline, people who wanted to discipline, law officers who were restrained from enforcing the law at times like they wanted. I wanted to make sure that every defendant that came before my court knew they were meeting somebody that did what they said. I didn't threaten, I promised. And so, people first time trouble, I didn't mind using probation, but I told every single defendant, you've got to understand, if any condition, I don't care what it is, any condition of probation is ever proved to have been violated, I promise you, you're going to prison. I was appealed several times on that, I'm not using the discretion I'm giving by law. We have over 400 district judges in Texas, and I don't know of anybody, I'm told, that never made an exception if you violate probation, and it's proven in court, you're going to prison. Now, there were people who violated, and since they knew they were in my court and knew if a violation was proved, they were going straight to prison. And I would consider the full range of punishment at that point, and I would consider whether or not they cooperated with law officers. You guys, I'm sure, understand the power that gives a probation officer who normally doesn't have power. Look, you're showing positive on this. You're going to inpatient treatment. You're going for the 10-month, or I'm filing the revocation, and you're going to prison. And so it's amazing how much information our narcotics officers got from guys who may have violated, and all of a sudden, look, if I tell you everything I know, will you ask the probation officer not to file on them? Because they knew if they filed, we had a hearing. Now, I didn't put up with probation officers that filed and couldn't prove it. if you're going to file a revocation proceeding in my court, you have to be ready to prove it. I don't want to waste time on anything that wasn't provable. But once if it was proved, I think there was one time, maybe twice, where it wasn't, and it made me very angry. You got to do your job. But one of the saddest sentencing I ever had, it was from one of the wealthier families in town. I didn't care race, creed, color, socioeconomic conditions, didn't matter. But a prior judge had put her on probation, and every time she was caught with drugs, she was told, now if you ever do this again, next time you're going to prison. And her family even hired one of my closest friends to be her lawyer. They packed the courtroom with big donors of mine that had helped me get elected judge. It didn't matter. And when it was clear, the sheriff did come to me and say, look, Judge, and it was kind of tongue-in-cheek, but I don't think it was entirely. He said, you know, Judge, she's been caught several times. She's like the only person who ever pays cash for really, really nice cars. You know how some guys lease their cars, so we got nothing we can forfeit. I mean, we really get a lot of money for our drug program. We catch her because it's a fully paid car. And he said, you know I'm kidding? I said, you are? Anyway, because they did do well on her cars. But anyway, when at the end of the hearing, her lawyer said, anything else you want to tell the judge? And she had tears pouring down her face, and she said, I just wish someone had told me no before today and meant it. We got to have credibility. Judges have got to have credibility. Law officers have got to have credibility. And then we can do some good. I'm a little concerned. I've got law officers back home. I've made so many friends in law enforcement through my years as a judge and chief justice. They're telling me that ICE, for example, is starting to get into things that don't have anything to do with the border. Pornography is a terrible problem, but I don't think that's the best use for ICE agents. We have been glorifying things and spending money on treatment, which is not a terrible thing. Or wouldn't it be better spent on prevention? You guys need help. I know you need help. I know you have a tough, tough life. And I'm so grateful for what you do. Of course, one of the problems we have here in Washington is on both sides of the aisle, people want to show how tough they are. I don't think I have to show anybody how tough I am. I've got a lot of years behind me with credibility, but we have over-criminalized everything. But people on both sides of the aisle, it's been a bipartisan effort. We have created at least 4,500, some say it's well over 5,000. They will quit counting. But crimes, federal crimes. You know, one guy, and that's something else. I don't think we need to be throwing money at EPA having their own SWAT team and other agencies. Everybody wants to do what a real law officer does, be able to arrest somebody. And so we've had testimony. One guy he was working on a solar battery, sent substance to Alaska. He knew by law it had to go by ground and not by air, went to UPS and checked the boxes ground only. He didn't know that there is a federal law and it's a crime not to put a sticker with an airplane with a line through it on the package. He was arrested in his home. Well, he was driving home. EPA, 3 Suburbans swooped in, drove him off the road, yanked him out, threw him to the ground. He didn't handcuff him. He didn't put the sticker on his package. One guy sent lobsters and used the wrong kind of packaging. Wasn't supposed to use cardboard, as I recall. And anyway, he's doing 8 years. Got a guy that got orchids sent to Houston from South America, and they didn't fill out a form right, and so he got 1.5 years to do in prison. We were showing how tough we are on things, but if it's a civil violation, pump the heck out of them with a fine, but don't waste jail time. Don't waste big prosecution time when we could spend that more valuably on things that are real crime and things that are so destructive to this country. This is something, and I'll finish with this. I was told go ahead and take 45 minutes, but I won't take that much time. I'm kidding. But some of my friends in Congress have said, "Are you crazy?" Because I've been rather assertive with our FBI director for his 5-year up and out policy. You guys, probably more than anybody else, understand how long it takes to build credibility. Your credibility is everything. If local law enforcement cannot trust you, then you're not going to do any good. And it takes time to build that credibility. And somebody that have dealt with federal authorities, you know, I've seen it as a prosecutor many years ago. State guys do all the work, and then a federal official comes rushing in at the end and has the press conference. Well, that doesn't build credibility. The FBI has to get to be known by local law enforcement, work with people in the various enforcement groups, and build credibility, because when he comes in, he doesn't have it. So to yank a guy out after 5 years and say, now you either go to Washington or you get out of the FBI, has caused us to lose several thousand years of law enforcement experience. Some said that I was crazy when I said to the director, sir, I don't know if you realize, but you said anybody in a supervisory role has to, in 5 years, either move to Washington or get out. And if you apply that to every single position, then you would have had to have left in September of '06. Someone said that was not a smart thing to say. So I mention this because if they come after me, I may need your help. But let me just finish with saying how much it means to be honored by you. I need to be honoring you, not being honored by you. As Clarence Thomas said, we take an oath to God not to be God, and I'm sure not. But I know you have a tough time of it. We need to give you more help than we have. We need to concentrate our help in the areas it does some good. And I know there are friends who say, we ought to just legalize all drugs. To me, that's a moral issue, because it's saying, you know what, we're okay with saying these lives don't count, they don't matter. We know they'll be worthless when they're addicted, but that's okay, it's cheaper. To me, that's immoral. Every life is worth something. And when we as a society say, we're okay with just saying, everybody wants to be a drug addict, go ahead, we'll give you the needles, you know, we'll help you with your addiction, to be addicted, stay addicted. That's an immoral society that won't last much longer. We live in the greatest country in the history of mankind, and I'm proud to be honored to be a part of those who are trying to preserve it for future generations. Thank you. God bless you.